Welcome, everyone. I am Josie Gonsalves of Public Square Amplified. Today, we are hosting the conversation, Gen Z on the 2024 political landscape, as part of our news reporting for US Democracy Day. We join hundreds of newsrooms across the country producing news reporting content as part of a nationwide pro-democracy reporting collaborative. We're an award-winning local nonprofit news organization that positions journalism as a civics tool and creates a pipeline for a new generation of community journalists through an emancipatory lens. Our awards are the exceptional work of our young journalists. Emma UK and Esther Paul are past winners. Brian Branch Price, photojournalist, is up for an award for his photo essay on the Palestinian protests. And Ishani Bakshi and Zoe Van Gelder, panelists today, are up for a nomination for a Student Journalism Impact Award. Fingers crossed. Please, guys, go to our website and read their stories. And if it's before midnight, you can nominate Zoe and Ishani. This town hall is made possible by a collaboration of fellow newsrooms, the Corporation for New Jersey Local Media, led by Amanda Richardson, who's manning the tech today. New Jersey Urban News, led by Penda Howell, who's manning the Q&A session. And Newark Stories, led by Britt Harley, who will close us out today. And I want to add a thank you to Britt for her generous donation to support the honorariums of the young panelists. Today, Britt's and anyone's contributions will be matched by US Democracy Day. So if you believe in local news, if you believe in Black media, we have also a fifth one here today, which is Black Liberation Media. So please support Black media. I want to acknowledge our sponsors, the Center for Cooperative Media, New Jersey Civic Information Consortium, and the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I want to extend my gratitude to the 7 young people you will hear from today. Thank you for agreeing to join this conversation. Thank you for your willingness to be thoughtful and courageous on the present stage of US democracy, or rather what I like to call the pay-to-play republic. Thank you so much. Today, I'm honored to have this gentleman as our moderator, Professor Dr. Jared A. Ball. His work on media, propaganda, and emancipatory journalism is foundational for our journalism. Professor Ball is Professor of Communication and Africana Studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, and author of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, which I've read and I recommend everyone should read. Ball is also host of the podcast, I Mix What I Like. He can be found at I Mix What I Like on most social media, and his decades of emancipatory journalism, media writing, and political work can be found at I Mix What I Like. And I really am honored to have him here. Jared, take it away. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. First of all, thank you for the kind words. Thanks for this invitation and what is for me a great honor to be able to moderate this discussion with all of these impressive young folks, and welcome everybody. So I thought that given I thought initially we were going to invite everybody to introduce themselves, all of the
Let's do that
before we got started.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Excellent idea.
And then we'll come back and kick it off.
Yeah.
So I don't. Yeah.
I think there's a lineup that they decided on. So
okay.
Who's kicking it off? Ishani.
Hi, my name is Ishani. I'm a junior in high school in Edison, New Jersey. I work with Public Square Amplified for about a year, and a little bit about me is I'm super interested in the environmental and food security scene, especially in New Jersey local politics. I'm very, very interested in climate change and energy independence as an issue in the upcoming election. And other things about me are that I'm also very, very interested in the genocide in Gaza. And also I'm very observant of the kind of performance politics currently ongoing in our election.
All right, I guess I'm next. Hi, everyone. My name is Richard. I am a first year in college studying neuroscience at the University of Pennsylvania. I grew up in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I am currently on my school's newspaper, specifically in the arts and culture section, because that's something I've always been interested in, even like in high school. And again, the issues I'm concerned with most are the war in Gaza and a lot of environmental policy, as well as inflation and what that means for my future. And I'm very excited to talk about it with everyone here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashton. Sorry, late. My camera will be on very soon. I am currently a law student at Fordham. I study in the evenings, hoping to do that. I'm also an engineer by day in pharmaceuticals. I work different treatments in lab a lot. And I think what really interests me is combining the law and science. I think it's difficult to translate a lot of what's going on in, let's say, public health, pharmaceuticals, how we should think about scientific findings to people. And I think that there needs to be a bridge of communication there. So one thing that really inspires me is becoming that bridge in my future career. And I'm excited to talk with
I'm not sure if that was the end of Ashton's introduction, but it's my turn to introduce myself after him. Hi, everyone. My name is Ada Safi. I'm a graduate of the Rutgers Newark journalism program, and I've spent a few years working at a local nonprofit here called the Muslim Network. I've been fortunate enough to take on a few different roles within that organization, one of which was covering the community, so profiling different New Jersey Muslims and Arabs who were doing really awesome work during the pandemic and after within local politics and things like that. In terms of like my interests, I'm interested in reading, writing, hiking, just to go on a little lighter note before we jump right into the mess of, of elections. Those are some of my favorite things to do. And yeah, I'm really excited to speak to everyone today, and I'm honored to be on this panel.
Cool. I'll go next. Hey everyone, I'm Zooey. And I graduated from Duke and I'm from West Windsor, New Jersey. And I currently work as an engineer working in hospital operations. I'm super interested in women's health, specifically hormonal health in that area. And also I'm part of an organization that provides healthcare for uninsured patients in the Bergen County area. So really interested in the access to healthcare overall. Also really interested in the consideration of tech privacy and talking about that, but really looking forward to this panel and hearing from everyone.
I'm next. My name is Zoe Van Gelder. I'm a freshman at Brandeis University studying history, law, and journalism. I've been a senior reporter with Public Square Amplified for the past 2 years now. It's been an amazing experience. I'm also into travel and writing in my free time. My primary concerns with this year's election, I'm going to be echoing my fellow panelists in that I'm very concerned about the ongoing war and genocide in the Gaza Strip right now. I'm also very concerned with climate change and the ongoing ecocide that we're seeing. And I'm also concerned about the level of urgency that it seems that both parties, but especially the Democratic Party, are painting in this year's election cycle, in that with the switch of candidates from Biden to Kamala, it seems that it's happened too late in the game and that there's not much room for criticizing or critique.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sadie Springer. I am a freshman at Brown University studying international and public affairs. I was introduced to this panel through one of my high school teachers who I worked closely with the Maps of Freedom School project on. I grew up in Maplewood, New Jersey. And some of my top concerns, to echo what everyone said, is the ongoing genocide in Gaza, definitely environmental racism and how that's kind of impacting poor communities in our country and abroad, and also the implementation or the possible implementation of Project 2025 and the general threat to our democracy. So.
All right, right on.
That's it, Jared. They're all there.
Yeah, right on. No, that was great. Thank you all very much. Bunch of a good group of very fascinating young people. This is going to be great. So I thought we would start off with a question about democracy, given the title of this program, and where we're headed in terms of even some of the topics you already all laid out. So many take for granted references to the US as a democracy, never really considering what it means to be both a republic, to Josie's point about pay-for-play republic, and more importantly, a settler colony. When you hear or are asked about democracy and its meaning, what comes to mind for you?
I guess I'll go first. So I feel like democracy is kind of like a way for, or democracy, I believe, is not being afraid to criticize the current institution. I feel like this freedom of speech, this willingness to not only participate, but also view the flaws and then advocate about certain issues in government is what is fundamentally at the core of democracy. So just not being afraid to criticize, not feeling the need to conform to your current system, always being willing to speak out, I think, is what defines democracy. And I plan to do some of that here today. So that's just my take.
I think to add on to what Richard said, I have the very classic like American history definition of democracy, which is the first three words of the Constitution, is very much in my eyes, it's always been we the people. I think it's very interesting how you brought up the fact that America was actually initially a settler colony. And I think that kind of shows that even from the start, though America's like not from the start, but very soon into American history, it's been about we the people. We didn't start off as we the people. We actually were kind of the most like violent form of colonialism as we like took over like the indigenous people. And even now, when we claim to be we the people, taking the example of the indigenous people, oftentimes the policies of our leaders don't actually support everyone. For example, like to continue with the indigenous like people example, I remember that there were these huge protests against Biden's energy plans to create this lithium mine in Nevada, which was protested against by Native Americans. And it just shows that democracy is about representing all the people, but sometimes, as Josie put it, it becomes a pay-to-pay republic, where only the lobbyist groups with the power and the money really actually make a difference.
Kind of to add on to that, I think what Richard said is kind of the idealized, copy and paste America version of democracy, but to contribute to the kind of pay to play mentality, capitalism is now so intertwined in our democracy and has been from the start, considering this country was built on enslaved labor. And I think kind of because people are becoming more aware of how lobbyists are affecting our political landscape, this is why we see such low political efficacy and why there's such low voter turnout. And I think it's almost like a mirage of individual input and like the single vote. So, yeah.
I was going to say, I really like that you brought up Republic. I've seen other comparisons drawn between democracy and Republic. But in my eyes, it feels like democracy is kind of the ideal and Republic is kind of the reality. I think as a nation, we tend to be very idealist. And to echo what people have said before, I agree with the notion of democracy as being a collaborative, as being the people's needs first, the people's input first. But I think we're working more with the physical system, which is a republic, which is kind of pay to play and it's pay to win. One of the biggest things I think of, like usually off the bat, is that it might be just me, but I've heard other people say it too, that like as kids, we were often told like, well, anyone can be president. You can even be president. You can run for president. And as you get older, you kind of start to get disillusioned by that and realize that not everybody can do that. And on a more individual level, not everyone can even fully participate in the political system, not even to that great extent, even to much more daily extents. There's so many people who can't participate in the system. So I was I'm very glad that you made that distinction between democracy and republic and how we're working with both, but at the physical level, working with one.
I think another layer to the conversation, which I would like to add, is I think democracy, obviously everyone is discussing in terms of a definition, but how it manifests itself on in society on a national scale has a lot to do with sovereignty and what the way of sovereignty looks like, and not just on a constitutional level, but some people place all their sovereignty is their identity and their identity politics. The sovereignty belongs to the Constitution, sovereignty belongs to borders, sovereignty belongs to the best interests of multiple national superpowers. And I think now the huge unrest that we're seeing is the clash of these different sovereignties coming together, where we have multiple different populations within America who have different values and who place different issues on a higher scale than others. And now we're not at the point we're willing to merge, because the thing that, holds us together, which is this democracy, it's now crumbling because it's not being held together with the same values or the same culture, the same identity that everyone is agreeing on. And I think that's a huge part of what we're discussing today as Gen Z. I think as a generation, we're trying to put these certain values on the forefront, like whether it be, clean air, good environment, whether it be safety in our schools, whether it be like the opportunity to have free thought, whether it be, free media, all of these things, we're trying to now redefine those and bring them to the forefront. But it's a lot harder for us because there's a huge gap between what people place as their priority. And so I think that's going to be like a huge part of the conversation today in terms of what we all see as important and moving forward, how those values will push who we hope to elect, basically.
Yeah, and I think adding on to that idea of sovereignty, even taught in schools is the idea of like democracy and as it affects like international policy. And we're almost taught like that if other countries are not in this idea of democracy, that it is justified for America to sort of go in and help them achieve that. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, or I definitely have a lot of issues with it and conflicted on if that's even related to the idea of democracy, but want to throw that out there as a point that like is definitely common that we hear, especially during this political election overall. And I guess my idea of democracy, and some people basically touched on this as well, is like the right to maybe criticize what's going on and that your criticism actually have an impact in our herd. And I don't know that it goes beyond like that. You need to take that and enforce it on other people as well. So.
Was that everyone? Okay, right on. Very good. So let's proceed. I heard a lot of mention of, potential critique or various alternative views to the concepts of democracy, concern for indigenous people, even the environment, all of which is under threat in the current genocide happening in Gaza, from the environment to obviously human lives, to concern for the indigenous population, despite previous claims of a people of Palestine being a people, a land without people for a people without a land. Given this global intifada that is involving a lot of students across the high school and college campuses, or response to the occupation of Palestine by Israel, and the height of the pitched height that it reached in the spring, the repressive conditions. We're already seeing universities across the country deploy, having prepared over the summer for a return. What are the rules of even on my campus, I should say, we've been given mandates from on high with very specific conditions under which students could protest, what could be said, what could not be said, when and where they could gather, and under what conditions, with threats of major penalties and abrogating university policy. As you all have been returning to campuses, some on new campuses for the first time, what are you observing as these new so-called rules of the game on your campuses?
Yeah, so to I guess contextualize what the new rules are, I'm first going to explain like what has been going on my campus at least. So from what I've been observing, earlier this year in spring, there has been a 16-day encampment protest, and as a result, College Green, which is where the protest was held, is completely fenced off. So students like are just like not allowed to walk onto the campus whatsoever. Another event that happened earlier this week was actually statue vandalism. So in order to protest the genocide, an unknown group spray painted the Ben Franklin statue, which is my university's founder, and he. Sorry, I choked on my own words a bit. And they kind of labeled Ben Franklin as someone who represents colonialism, and he was an American imperialist, and he did have a history of slave ownership, which I believe ties into the issues of today. And as a result, the statue has also been fenced off completely. So the new rules of the game, it has been like a ban in response to these exact events. So there have been a lot of restrictions on protests. Protests have been restricted to like I guess like business hours. So it's from 5 to 10 p.m. only on certain days of the week, and of course during finals, no protests are allowed whatsoever. There have been limitations or complete bans on projection screens. Obviously, no more spray paint or any kind of marking on any of the public property of the university. Encampments have been completely banned. So just like it's really interesting seeing how with the Palestine movement, there has been a heightened activism, especially on college campuses. And the administration has, as a result, or in response to this, have heightened their own restrictions on protest. And their justifications for this, which I think are very interesting, is that their protests, the pro-Palestine protests, are being conflated with anti-Semitism because there are Jewish communities on campus, and the administration are giving them that criticism of, you are believing this or you're stating this, you must be anti-Semitic or you're displaying sentiments of anti-Semitism, which kind of, even though that's not the case at all, and I think that like closed-mindedness is what is censoring a lot of these people who have been hurting for a very long time. And just to play the game now, it's just a lot more restrictions, and I think it's unprecedented restrictions. So I'm going to have to see how this unfolds this year because a lot of what hasn't been done before has been immediately quelled. So yeah, that's just what I've been observing on my campus.
Kind of touching on the topic of the conflation between Zionism and just Judaism, or anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I think it's really interesting talking about Hillel groups on campuses. Many groups have their own chapters, and specifically Brown University. Hillel is actually really close to my dorm, and the university advertises their events all the time. And as a Black anti-Zionist Jew, I decided to attend an event because it claims to be a space for all Jewish students on campus. And Hillel has like really close ties to Israel and is very publicly pro-Israel. And I don't know, I think it's interesting that a religious organization on campus holds this political belief and is very unfriendly to pro-Palestine or pro-Palestinian Jews. So there's actually a separate group, Jews for Ceasefire, on campus. And so I attended a Shabbat at Hillel and a Shabbat at Jews for Ceasefire, and it was kind of a very different experience. And one was kind of focused on brainwashing and indoctrination, and the other was focused on liberation. And Brown actually has kind of a unique experience with the encampments. The administrators actually agreed to hold a vote in October discussing divestment from companies that are supplying Israel with arms. So kind of there's just this tension on campus building up to this October vote. And there's actually in the past couple of weeks, there's been a group of Zionist students who've presented the university with a list of explaining how divestment is anti-Semitic. And then there's also been a group who's explaining why, it's harmful and impacting the genocide. And just as like an activist who applied to Brown, claiming to be an activist, they like let me in because they claim to be pro-activism. And but then kind of when it's framed as pro-Palestine, that's when we start running into problems. And I don't know, I think it's interesting. And at Hillel, of course, the diversity photographer got me, and they sent out an e-blast with my picture. And I actually emailed them and some of their lawyers asking them to take it down. I was advised by the Jews for Ceasefire to do that because it would cause internal processing problems. But I don't know, I think there's just, and I think for the most part, most of the students on Brown's campus want a ceasefire and are pro-Palestine. But then there's this kind of small influential group that the university caters towards, which I don't know, I find that kind of strange. I mean, strange is not a great word, but at our convocation ceremony, there was a group of students who held up a sign that read, there are no convocations in Gaza, kind of discussing how there's no universities in Gaza standing today. And I think this has also just made me realize what a privilege it is to be attending university at this time, even if there are conflicts and disturbances. And I don't know, I think talking about democracy, I think civil disobedience is like the ultimate test of how strong-willed our democracy really is.
If I can also quickly add to that, I'm an MIT alum since 2020. And when the protests started, I mean, as a student body, we're pretty outspoken as students in general. And we've had one of the graduate students who I actually went to undergrad with become very outspoken and gain a big following on X, she was on CNN with Jake Tapper, like Richard said, conflating anti-Semitism with our ask to stop the genocide, our demand to stop the genocide. And to think that you can get so powerful off of the name MIT or maybe the name Brown or maybe other names, it sends a different message of, look at what's happening at our great institutions, MIT, the students can't learn. Meanwhile, all you have to do is get some headphones and you'll be fine. The noise isn't more than a party that's happening next door. And it's also happening during the daytime. It's not like these are protests are going on all day. So I think one other thing we have to think about is how might the names of our institutions be weaponized and used against us, as if the accolade you strive towards getting into the school you like is now suddenly turned against you. How liberal our institutions have become, I think, is one argument that a lot of the conservative side has used, that our colleges are places for our students to go and become indoctrinated. But actually, we're here to learn and look at history. And I think that when we start to take classes and start to understand what's happened with gender, race, ethnicity in this country and also worldwide, I think we come to a very similar conclusion, not because of indoctrination, but because of we want to be on the side of where people's humanity is being recognized. So I think when I have one of my former classmates now on CNN calling my people who are in school right now anti-Semites, I'm like, you don't know them. There's Jewish people on the lawn. So I think it's definitely more than just identity there. But what I'm trying to get at is I think there's something bigger, maybe looking at who might be a good voice to cast doubt in our country, cast doubt on our institutions of education.
And I guess like taking that further, it's like you go through your university system and then you graduate. And in my case, like I started working in tech, and we always heard at work, like, keep your politics at home. But like all major tech companies are actively investing in parts of the ongoing conflict, especially like Israeli military directly, or even like economy and operations. And so it's like the organization you're part of is funding maybe things you don't believe in. So what are you supposed to do in that situation when you were taught to, okay, we can challenge things in the university, and then you come into real life and it actually affects like your job? Where, and maybe you guys probably have seen like a major case where like Google employees were fired for protesting, and one of those employees actually came from my college as well. So it's concerning the fact that the act of speaking out, and even if it's not hateful, like kind of follows you even further, like even during your college time where you're encouraged to, but then in your early employment as well.
To add, so I kind of spent a lot of my summer like wondering what I was going to be stepping into, going to Brandeis. So just for reference or for context, so Brandeis was founded in the 1950s, I believe, or late 1940s, as a school for Jewish excellence or for Jewish academics, because Jewish students were barred from the Ivies during that time. And it was founded with a similar message, not similar, but an aligning message that anybody was welcome at that university. And so this summer before attending, I was kind of wondering like what I was getting myself into. And it's been almost like watching a Groundhog Day of the debate, honestly, because it's very split down the middle. We also have like a huge Hillel presence here. And I think at the individual level, I've seen a lot of like very like almost comforting scenarios where people are willing to talk and like push past the identity politics of it and have actual critical conversations about this stuff. But when it comes to kind of the university level of things, it just feels really reminiscent of the debate where it's like, I don't want to offend this side too much and I don't want to offend that side too much. Let's give both sides a seat at the table and have them have a conversation where nothing is really accomplished or no real agenda comes out of it. And it feels extremely performative at the university level, at least, and at some of like the student body levels. And it kind of seems like no one wants to go really deep into it. But at the same time, nobody wants to look at the simple part of it, which is that war just hurts everybody involved besides the select companies like Zooey mentioned that profit off of it. At the end of the day, the individual people are getting hurt by it. And it feels weird because we're having like kind of the same conversation, but not the same conversation. And yet nothing is getting done. So that's been the sentiment I've had at Brandeis so far, which has been interesting.
So unlike my other panelists, I've not gone to college or graduated college, but I guess I have a few things to say. First of all, I think it's really interesting how most of the universities, like all the Ivies, kind of paint themselves as these really liberal institutions. They previous to affirmative action getting overturned, they would, and even now, they all constantly boast about their diversity statistics and how they're really open to other voices. Columbia has always had a huge history of like being the activism university where people would go to protest. But now it seems like they want the protest when it's convenient for them. Like I know, I remember Richard saying how they have like hours for protesting, which kind of defeats the idea of protesting. Protesting is not supposed to be convenient for the institution. It is supposed to cause disruptions. And if a university is saying, "Oh, you can do this in this place when it's away from us," then it's not causing the intended effect of a protest. I think that just ties into further of the general idea of these kind of like performative like liberalism in many universities and amongst many people, where they just want to be liberal enough or woke enough to kind of gain public acceptance. It's kind of like a weird comparison would be kind of like any company in Pride Month, like think about the Target line. When it's convenient, they start throwing out all the Pride collections. They start, donating to all the right organizations. But once the month ends, everyone goes back to just being neutral or even perhaps harmful to the community. I think the same thing can be seen in colleges. And I think another thing about when it comes to the Palestine protests and opponents going and just calling it anti-Semitic, I feel like you can see that even outside of college campuses. For example, I know the Anti-Defamation League had a lot of internal like conflict a while ago when the CEO claimed that being anti-Zionist means that you are anti-Israel and you're anti-Semitic and you can't support Palestine without being anti-Semitic. And I feel like this just bring to them the even wider issue of a lack of criticisms not being allowed in 2024, where you can't criticize a group or a candidate without completely being named the enemy. I think that is not democratic at all. And in fact, forget it not being democratic, it's actually anti-progress, and it's going to run any nation down back into history and down the hole.
Really quickly to address LM Carter's question in the chat. So I'm not exactly sure of the financial ties of like Hillel to the university, but I know just recently Joseph Edelman, who was a trustee on the Brown Corporation and head fund manager, he stepped down and cut all ties with Brown University, citing the divestment vote in October. He doesn't want the vote to happen, and he claims it's anti-Semitic. And so I think also overall the university is much more concerned with being labeled anti-Semitic than, I guess, than like being labeled not a fan of student protest, because again, this like buzzword of anti-Semitism, it's dangerous, and like it's been thrown around so much that it's kind of void of meaning now. And I think that, you know, it's such an easy way to shut down any sort of discussion, just be like, oh no, that's anti-Semitic, that's anti-Semitic. And, you know, people have said my takes are anti-Semitic. And then when I tell them I'm a Jew, then they're like, oh, then you're self-hating. Then, you know, you're internalized anti-Semitism. And so I think that and even the university's president, her speech during convocation was just very broad and vague, and she mentioned, you know, student protests on campus in this very like vague terminology, not ever directly citing Palestine, because they're like teetering and, you know, stepping on eggshells, and they don't want, you know, these powerful board members to resign, but they're also trying to prevent student life from like exploding on campus. So
Yeah, adding on to what Sadie said about like, again, these organizations, just because you're supporting one thing, it doesn't mean you are completely against the other. And again, that's the conflation with anti-Semitism. Last spring, on my university's campus, there was a Palestinian rights fair, and that was shut down a couple days later because, again, the administration criticized them for being anti-Semitic. And I believe that, again, with this wealth factor and donations, which I believe was a question asked in the chat, there is a significantly greater Hillel population on campus. When I went to the club fair for my university last week, there were a lot of Jewish communities on campus. So there's like a lot more opportunities and funding. And this kind of plays into Penn's general history of funding for the Jewish community. And it's a pretty large discrepancy between Jewish funding and then Arab and Muslim funding. And this is just my speculation. I feel like it does have a lot to do with alumni donations because, again, Penn has a $21 billion endowment. So obviously, kind of sustaining this wealth and sustaining these numbers is a large priority to them. So if we kind of approach colleges as businesses or like monetary or like from the monetary lens, they're kind of like being driven by money to appeal more to these groups. So I think Sadie touched on this with universities being so afraid of the label of anti-Semitism that they are willing to kind of quell anything that might seemingly go against it, even though it's not. I've actually met a few Jewish students here who are anti-Zionist, which I think is definitely an opportunity for discussion. People who are willing to criticize the practices of a portion of their own community. But yeah, the administration is very afraid of that discussion simply because the label might jeopardize potential alumni donations in the future. So I believe money is unfortunately a factor that also plays into it as well.
I want to add another layer to the conversation that might not be fully relevant, but so forgive me in advance. But as an Arab and as a Muslim who has multiple Palestinian friends, who I consider myself Palestinian, I just want to say that there's been a huge, huge, huge shift in public opinion. And for someone this has been my cause literally since I was born, there's such a stark difference in today's reality than like the last assault on Gaza by Israel was in 2014, like on a major scale. Obviously, apartheid and um, killing and murder is a daily reality of Palestinians, but the last major assault in Gaza was in 2014. And the difference between the response in America then versus now is like light years away. I mean, like when I used to go to protests back in 2014, I would be pressed to find even another person from another like country who was non-Arab even. And now today, when I go to a protest, it's like everyone from everywhere. So on one hand, I do want to say I'm not going back to a college campus because I'm past like the expiration date right now of being a college student. So one hand, I do want to say like this has been a huge, huge, huge inspiration for a lot of people who have been carrying this cause for many years. I know for some of you, maybe this might be a new cause because it's recently come into your orbit or you've always thought about it, but it's never really affected you. But this has been something that's been really inspiring to watch on college campuses. And I've had the honor of like going to different encampments and protesting alongside people. And it's been really nice to see, um, for once, other people caring about, you know, my people's struggle and their murder basically. So that's been a really nice thing to see. But then on the other hand, on like a critical thinking type of basis, we've been talking about democracy and what a successful democracy looks like and some type of loyalty to the citizens. I feel like now as a generation, our biggest emotion is betrayal by our own government because the things that we view as important are not being heard, are not being acted on. And it hurts even more when a foreign entity is being given that priority instead of us as citizens of America. And it's actually a bit sad that this loyalty that we see to a foreign country has taken priority over us as citizens and what we think. And so I think when we continue to fight against these, whether it be the genocide in Gaza, whether it be like climate change or gun violence or wherever it may be, we actually do have a role model or we do have a sample of what a successful like relationship between two countries look like. Unfortunately, it's not in our benefit, but it's up to us to shift that. The loyalty we see between America and Israel is something that should be between America and its citizens, whether it be funding, whether it be through programs, whether it be through diplomacy, whatever it may be. And it seeps so deeply into our schools, it seeps so deeply into our government. So much so that now we're seeing it everywhere. And I'm really happy that you know the curtain has fallen and a lot of people have seen the reality as it is. But I think, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be going back to college anytime soon, but for those of you who are and who are like pushing on this fight, I just want to encourage you and say that you inspire us. And hopefully this is like a huge shift for the future of redefining what our colleges look like.
I think to kind of add on to what you said about the difference in response and kind of to bring it back to kind of one of the central discussion points about Generation Z, not to give us too much credit, but I do think that a lot of the change in response from 2014 to now is us coming of age and getting involved in politics. And I think for our generation, we've grown so accustomed to witnessing violence every single day because of globalization and technology that it's like I almost feel like instead of us becoming desensitized to it, we've become like hyper vigilant and hyper aware of it. And it's like no longer excusable. I mean, not that it ever was, but we're now confronted with it. And so to be a bystander, well, there's plenty of bystanders still, but it's like, I just feel like there's no way you can do that when you open Instagram and see like a Palestinian child being beheaded. And, there's debate among that if that's fully like productive, but I feel like I don't know, like wait, where was I going with this? I had a point. I'm sorry. I don't know. I think yeah, media has definitely played a big role in this, and this is like the most well documented genocide in the history of our world, and the fact that it can be documented in this way And I think journalism is so interesting, and bringing that back to the public square. But yeah.
I think I want to add something else to what Ala and Sadie are saying. Last year, at a certain point, it was maybe 20,000 dead in Palestine, and now we're at 40,000. And I think last year I was thinking, well, at what number is public opinion going to change? And I think looking at another marginalized group and seeing that the consequence is death or severe injury, I can't just look at that and not think we need to do better here. The White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, she got asked about the current Haitian hate spree that's going on in Springfield, in Michigan, or I forget which state, but it's pretty much, the rumor is Haitians are eating animals, which is ridiculous. But she was asked about that, if she feels Ohio, thank you. She was asked if she felt personally affected by that, and she said, well, when any marginalized group is affected, I feel personally for it. And well, not any marginalized group, because Palestine is one marginalized group that we're not outwardly trying to do something besides saying we need a ceasefire. We need more than just the words. We need an action to go along with it. Otherwise, it's a double speak. So I think me as a Black person in the U.S., we need to look at other marginalized groups and say, okay, all right, how are we, Congo, Sudan, for example, we need to make sure that we're paying attention to them as well.
Excellent, excellent. Just a couple of quick, if I can, just a couple quick points here. For those who may not be aware, the reference to the Hillel group, it should be understood that they are a subset or a subsidiary of the B'nai B'rith organization, a very conservative Zionist organization here in the United States. So their purpose is to engage college campuses to defend Zionist and conservative politics. Just to add a little bit, the University of Maryland shut down what was supposed to be a commemoration, a unified commemoration of October 7th, because they felt it was leaning too far to being pro-Palestinian. I believe it was New York University that has recently decided that Zionism is a protected class, or Zionists is a protected class, so they cannot be criticized. And a lot of this has to do with the Hasbara Project of Israel, which has an expressed policy to condemn criticism of Israel's policies with claims of anti-Semitism. So I think all of that. And then very lastly, I think Zoe, who is at Brandeis, I would encourage you and anyone else interested to read the new book by Dr. Joy James about Angela Davis, whose alma mater is Brandeis, and to see how that university factors and figures in that book. And I think you'll see some parallels. But moving forward, there's been a number of good points made about messaging, narrative, propaganda. And to that end, I am often reminded of one of my favorite media theorists, Marshall McLuhan, and for all of his conservative Eurocentric politics, he had one very, I think, important point that he said, that we don't know who discovered water, but we know it was not the fish, because an all-pervasive environment is always beyond perception. And we see that attempted, that certainly at play. Similarly, I don't know if you all were aware, but in 2018, the Air Force ran a series of war games targeting, with the idea of targeting a potential rebellion coming from your generation. The idea was that Generation Z was going to grow up and realize that all of the promises made to you were not going to be delivered. And rather than think about redistribution or advances in democracy, the one of the main things considered, in addition to propaganda and messaging, was war games run by the Air Force targeting, preparing to target its own population should there be some sort of uprising among your generation. So as I talk to my students and my children, I'm increasingly concerned with what I'm terming a civilizational crisis in methodology, and that given the propaganda and the psychological warfare that is increasingly, to McLuhan's point, targeting your generation and younger generations with more and increased sophistication. I am wondering how you all engage your media environment and the propaganda you face. What is your methodology for assuring that you are reaching sound conclusions? In other words, how do you know what you know, or why do you like what you like?
I think there is a very high chance of anyone in our generation or just anyone on the internet right now to get stuck in an echo chamber. It's literally how the internet, it's how the algorithm works. We hear what we want to hear. And I think, I mean, what we want to hear, of course, is influenced by our life circumstances, who we surround ourselves with in general. It's very hard to find information that does not agree with our set beliefs. And I think it's especially hard considering how the leaders of our world are giving us information. Like, if you've noticed, following the election, well, what's really, sorry, following the presidential debate, things that are being majorly discussed on the internet are not the candidates' policies, not the main issues. No, our generation is more concerned about the cats and dogs clip, which of course, it's hysterical, it's insane. But is it really something that we should be focusing on, other than the fact that it shows prejudice towards immigrants? It is not a key issue. It is not going to change the election. And similarly, when it comes to Republicans, I know there was this huge conspiracy online about whether Kamala's earrings were Bluetooth devices, which obviously is preposterous, they weren't. And it just shows that I think the focus of the press and social media is completely off base, and instead it's kind of focused on just getting mass consensus. And I know, like, oftentimes people says no one liked Kamala until 6 weeks ago, and I think that's really true. Like, before six weeks ago, no one really spoke of the vice president. She wasn't this kind of, it wasn't this like queen that we all looked up to, and now suddenly the Democratic Party is pushing her like anything, and anyone who identifies themselves as blue has to go get on that bandwagon or get off. And I think that in such a climate, it's very important for anyone, not just Gen Z, to not look at social media or even to the traditional press for all the information. I would seek out like actual research. And I know no one has the time to do so, which is why I think we should actually be criticizing the leaders who put out this information, because it's not feasible to say everyone should do their own research, because no one has the time for that. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ishani, especially about algorithms and in this new age of AI, how videos and what you see online and all this content you consume kind of caters to your interests. I myself have seen a lot of like doctored footage of politicians. There has been this conspiracy that Joe Biden is a pedophile, and I have seen like doctored photos of him like sniffing a child, and I look to the comments just to see if people think it's a joke or not, and everyone's kind of buying into it. So just like with this new age of AI, people are consuming content after content, so it becomes suddenly very difficult for people to form their own ideas and form their own opinions off of a neutrally politically charged information. So it's kind of scary to think, because I think Ishani said before, with like doing your own research and not solely relying on the press and what you see on media to form your own opinions. I think it's really scary. And with this advent of AI and just scrolling and scrolling, I think a lot of people have shortened attention spans and maybe aren't willing to do that research on their own, because again, it's a very time consuming thing to do. And suddenly, like upholding your duty as a citizen to stay informed, um, especially off of like neutral information, can be really difficult, because on the internet there is like no screening process, or like there's hardly a screening process for what you can post. There isn't any fact checking, so it's very easy to fall into these echo chambers. And again, it's very easy to form your own ideas, because AI has just gotten very adept and proficient at kind of playing into the weakness of people, I guess, like conforming to what they believe in already. And maybe that makes them not be willing to explore any ideas that fall outside of this echo chamber. So yeah, it's definitely scary what AI is doing and how it stifles people's originality or tendency to form their own ideas or have that critical thinking. So I think that is the largest disease of AI in terms of like politics.
And I think kind of the like digital culture, specifically like around debate. I know, Ishani, you brought this up about kind of the cats and dogs meme, and the fact that like even the left has packaged the debate in kind of this like unserious light, or like Kamala's campaign team, strategically has made her social media presence very lighthearted and funny. And we were actually talking about this phenomenon in one of my sociology classes, about the role of humor in politics and discussing these topics. And my professor was arguing that Kamala is like bringing joy back, and she's so joyful, and like Walz is so joyful and innocent, and like versus Trump is, campaigning with hatred, which could be argued as true, but I find this joy kind of disingenuous when we're talking about the slaughtering of 40,000 people. And I understand in terms of campaigning and strategy, like why they're, you know, portraying her in this light. But there was so much more attention on this like cat and dog eating Ohio thing, which has to do with Haitian immigrants, and which is like very serious and very hurtful to Haitian people. Instead of maybe the fact that they devoted like 2 minutes to talking about the environment, or they were literally spent so long arguing who loves Netanyahu more and who's going to, defend Israel harder. And then they like pan to Kamala, like kind of laughing at Trump's remarks and like the ridiculousness of it. But it's hard to like view my future as like ridiculous. And I think that's why so many, I don't know. And I don't know. And it was kind of disappointing to see kind of how many memes were made out of this, and kind of just how like everything needs to be entertaining nowadays. Like the debate, so many people were like, ooh, getting my popcorn, watching the debate. And um, yeah, just how kind of entertainment has infiltrated every facet of our lives.
Yeah, to jump off
sorry.
that. Oh, Ashton, do you want to go?
Please, Zoe, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. To jump on that, at Brandeis, we had bingo night for the debate, so I completely get the whole turning it into entertainment. So I know we're Gen Z, and this whole panel is about Gen Z. But coming back from coming to college, over the summer, I worked a job with a lot of younger kids as like a camp counselor. So I was working with Gen Alpha, who's the one that's right below us. And so they were kind of like a really blatant, like explicit view at what unrestricted, constant inundation of media and stuff does to the adolescent, not even fully pubescent brain yet. And I specifically remember this one case where I had this one 6-year-old boy, and we were watching this one movie. I think it was like Elemental or something. And we were talking about the parallels between that movie and kind of the structural divide our own society has, and how that makes it different for different groups and how they approach life and stuff. And he was trying to talk about it, and he was like, well, can I say the word black, or does that make me racist? And I just kind of was like taken aback by it, like what are you consuming on the internet? Because they all have tablets, they all have phones, they're constantly inundated with this. But my point was to go to the college level and say that it's not crazy different, like from these 6-year-olds who are being inundated by their iPads with TikToks and Instagram reels about what's going on in our society. It's just a lot more subtle. Like I feel like there's this need to make whatever you're trying to say more palatable. Like if you're not completely in line with one party or the other. It really it reminds me a lot of Ed Bernays, the book Propaganda, and the fact that like an entire party becomes a personality, becomes an ideology and stuff. And that if you're not in that personality, if you're not in that ideology, you're out. And if you want to even have a chance to be heard at the table, you have to make it palatable to that person that you're at the table with. But when it comes to my own like method, I guess, of trying to strain out what's fact, what's not fact, what's fact to some people, not to others. There's like a saying about diversifying your income, and I try to just apply that to my knowledge. So I just try to diversify my information streams and listen to anybody and everybody, and kind of just filter out the BS and filter out the truth and stuff like that, and kind of find my own truth in that way. So that's how I've been handling it, but I'm sure even that's not enough.
I think when I think about Sadie's point of Kamala and Tim Walz being the happiness duo, pretty much, it made me feel good initially when I saw Kamala running. I'm like, oh yes, finally, like the hope. And I still do feel those emotions because I'm, well, a human and emotional person. But she told us point blank she wants our military to be the most lethal fighting force in the world. And I'm thinking, aren't we already that? But besides that point, our generation is going to be recruited to make these lethal weapons. The engineers are going to be creating deadly weapons with machine learning, AI. It's going to be automated pretty much. And so I think when we're on campuses and when we see people protesting Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, protesting Lockheed Martin, those are the companies who need our labor, need what we think of to create the next innovative deadly weapons. So when I think of that, I think of the fact that we need to be receptive of messages saying you should look into these companies that are at your career fairs that are talking to you saying that, yeah, we're a defense company. Okay, well, what do you mean by defense? Well, we create these solutions. Well, what are the solutions? What are we trying to solve? The solution is we're pioneering new lethal military technology. So I think when we are in positions of privilege, when we go to college, we should be thinking about who is trying to get our labor right after we leave, when we don't know much and when we're kind of vulnerable to these industries. And that can be pretty much any industry. I'm in pharmaceuticals, and I think that I didn't know too much about the industry when I came in. I've been here for 4 years, and you're not going to have every single answer, but you can ask questions. You can ask questions. You can see if where you are is the right place, or if maybe you should sidestep. I have had countless people I went to school with go work for the defense companies and go kill people. And I can't look at them the same ever again because I'm like, the information that I have is so little on the outside. What could you know when you're on the inside?
I think, Professor Jared, going back to your point about propaganda, something that I learned when I was very early in my college career, unfortunately, I was a journalism major, and of course, when you first start with journalism, you're very wide-eyed and you're very obviously curiosity brings you into journalism as a first step. But I think the first thing that I learned, propaganda comes from somewhere. Obviously, it comes in the form of writing. It comes in the form of TV shows. Comes in the form of different mediums. And one of the biggest realizations that I had when I was in college is that, unfortunately, journalism is not the exception of classism. And I think classism runs everything in America. And I thought that journalism as an industry was above that, but unfortunately, it's not. And what I mean by that is when you look at where you get something, you have to look of how those people got there. Most people can't afford to even pursue journalism because it requires a level of economic stability where you're able to live with a few unpaid internships and you're able to, just write, you're able to be a journalist is not quite as idealistic as what I thought it was when I was younger, just like, oh, I'm interested in telling stories and boom. No, there's a very distinct class of people who, and I believe it's been designed this way, who can succeed in journalism. Of course, there are exceptions. Of course, there are people who have broken through, but now I'm seeing more than ever. I just trust independent journalists more. I trust people who have their own, platforms, who are on Substack, who have their own, nonprofit newsrooms, because one, it shows me that they don't fit into the classic and traditional form of journalism, and that's actually a comfort for me because I know that the people who do are catering to a news broadcast, and those news broadcasts are companies are funded by certain people with certain ideals and certain ideas and certain values. So the fact that you don't fit into that actually means that you're catering to me. So if you don't work at CNN, if you don't work at CBS, if you don't work at the New York Times, it's a green flag for me because I know that, you couldn't fit into this character of what they want you to be. And it's sad that it's like that because the people who we sorely, sorely, sorely need in journalism actually cannot afford to be sustained in it. So in terms of like how I consume my media, I consume a lot of it from independent journalists, a lot of it from people who write on Substack, a lot of it from people on the ground on social media who I can trust, and then just like fingers crossed, basically.
Yeah, and I guess the broader point is that there's just like overall a lack of trust and trust in your government. And I don't think even 10, even 20 years ago, that same lack of trust was there. And there's so many reasons to that, but part of it might be that you don't have as much information and know what's going on around the world. So whatever you sort of learn, you're going to believe it, right? And then now we have access to things, but then also a lot of those things can be fake. And I know a lot of us probably have gone through, you see things, you start to believe them, it makes sense, and then you might want to dive deeper. Again, like look on Substack, look on X, wherever, kind of go to the source and actually form your opinion. But on the other hand, we have like, and because we're so polarized in the US too, we have like Republican or people who support Trump also doing their own research and believing certain other people and saying that's the truth. And it's honestly kind of similar. And the targeted knowledge that they say is like, oh, these Democrat or whatever, liberal, crazy, whatever, are like going out of their way and following these random people. But I mean, both sides are kind of doing that in their own way and believing that sort of narrative is correct. And I guess it just brings up a bigger question is like, nobody's trusting the government right now, regardless of like where they stand politically. And there's so much information, a lot of it is fake. Like, how can we actually come to terms and like elect people that we believe in? I think like in the sense of like the upcoming election, a lot of it, or like Kamala's current campaign, is kind of just like what might get people to be interested, and which might end up being like jokes, I guess, rather than like what do you actually believe in and what do you stand for. It just feels less real. And I guess I definitely don't have an answer to the question, but it sort of just brings up like there's a lack of trust and we're all like looking for our own resources, but like how does that, I guess, influence organizing and community organizing and actually things at a higher level?
One more point I quickly wanted to make based on something that Sadie and Zoe said earlier. They talked about how the presidential debate was looked at really lightly and how people have popcorn out, there was bingo and everything. And that really makes me think of how other nations are looking at the US. I know at the presidential election, they were both debating about who's more well respected amongst foreign leaders. And I know that Harris said that other leaders said that Trump is a joke, and then Trump pointed out that the Hungarian leader said that when he was in power, everything was okay. But I think they both have to have more self-awareness in the fact that we have one leader who doesn't really act as dignified as leaders should, which is really, really important on a public relations standpoint. And the Harris administration, well, the Biden administration was the administration that led to the Afghanistan pullout. In the first few months of office, they created one of the biggest foreign policy disasters. And I think the fact that we have such almost like incapable leaders on a foreign policy standpoint, and when other nations and other citizens from across the world tune into American politics, what they see are people fighting about cats and dogs and just shouting ad hominem attacks. The fact that America's entertainment is not only concerning for us, but it's concerning for how the rest of the world views what used to be once the superpower of the globe.
Did everyone speak? Okay, right on. Excellent. We have a couple good questions coming in from the chat. I do want to ask one more before I turn to those, and it involves the elections and some of what you all have already raised. And I'm wondering, to what extent are any of you aware of, for instance, efforts like the Abandon Harris campaign, which is not, of course, designed to support Trump, but its main claim is that we cannot reward the Democrats who have been carrying out the genocide. To what extent are you all aware of the so-called third parties, Claudia de la Cruz and Karina Garcia for the Party of Socialism and Liberation? Dr. Jill Stein and Dr. Butch Ware have a compelling Green Party campaign. Cornel West and Dr. Melina Abdullah are also there as well. are you all considering any of these options? Do they even factor into your media diets or the discussions you all are having around what to do in November?
Yeah, so one movement, or like I guess one third party movement that I have stumbled across is the uncommitted movement. And this movement, it advocates for, I guess, the amelioration of suffering in Gaza. It demands a complete arms embargo on Israel, and a complete ceasefire. And the premise of this, again, this is it kind of plays into the Abandon Harris campaign, is kind of picking a none of the above option on the poll when you vote in November. And I think that this is interesting, but I also feel like this is kind of like forfeiting your vote, or it kind of becomes a lost vote, or one vote that would not be against Trump. I do believe that with the Harris and Trump dyad, I believe Harris to be the lesser of the two evils. So I don't know at this point in the election if voting for a third party would be considered productive. So that's kind of something that I'm still thinking about. I haven't made any final decisions yet. But again, if it was just between Harris and maybe a third party who wouldn't be pro-Israel, then I would for sure vote for that party. But because Trump kind of makes this dynamic triangular, I definitely have to take that into account as well and vote Harris, because there are some policies of hers that are maybe less extreme, and maybe she's more receptive to criticism from her parties. So that's just where I stand.
I think it's really unfortunate how the two-party system works. And I know like there's so much dialogue among my friends and I about kind of the morality of voting for Harris. But I think for me, like I can't make it a moral kind of like issue just because then I like wouldn't vote for her. And I do think like kind of the looming threat of Project 2025, which I know Dems have really used the like fear mongering in this campaign to like make it so that like we really feel like we're protecting democracy. But I do think to some extent like Project 2025 would mean like getting rid of a lot of checks and balances and inundating Washington with all of these majorly conservative reps. And I think like third parties, the Green Party in theory sounds amazing, but I just don't think it's realistic, especially this close to the election. Like there really are like it's kind of like I don't know, there's not much choice in my opinion. It's kind of like it's deceiving or not deceiving. It's just like I don't know. It's the whole like third party system. It's just unfortunate that I just don't think it's possible for a third party candidate to ever be elected in our current political landscape. So I do believe that voting third party does pave way for Trump to be elected.
I kind of like that voting party paves the way for Trump, because it puts pressure on the party that doesn't have Trump to hopefully respond, which I doubt they would actually respond to a third party, but we need other movements to put pressure on the main movement. And in the 2020 election, we saw the stances of Bernie Sanders, of Elizabeth Warren, of I think Kamala Harris kind of followed the former two, but I think we saw those stances marginally get adopted into the Biden campaign. We do need them. I think where I see it is I can't tell people how to use their vote. I think other people might look at people who don't vote as waste. I can't look at it that way when we have at the end of it two evils that are going up against each other. And I think one of them has the better outcome for people here in the US. So I'm voting for Kamala in November, but I think we have to keep putting pressure on her and the campaign in general, because we saw the third party votes in 2016 for the Green Party sway the election. And that fear I want to keep on the Democratic Party that they might lose the election. I also don't, in my circles, when I talk to people about do they care about the United States supporting Israel as an ally, I don't think this is as much a voter issue. It seems like it's a money issue for the Dems, but that's just my personal opinion, not backed up by fact, just by my conversations with people close to me.
I was gonna say, when it comes to third parties, like even being promoted to me on my feed, I think initially the only ones that ever like, I'm gonna call it organically, quote unquote, that ended up on my feed were Claudia and Karina. And I do like a lot of their platform and what they stand for. But my like, because I do understand the legitimacy of recognizing that we are working with a two-party system. And on top of that, we're working with the Electoral College, and the fact that, at least like for me up here in like the Northeast, I'm kind of feeling like we're really just going to be watching like 5 or 6 states really be the determining factor on this entire election, which kind of creates another layer of like maybe not voter apathy, but kind of just wondering how much it really counts, being in a state that normally does run so blue in Massachusetts, and also being from New Jersey, which also usually runs blue. But my main hesitancy with the whole lesser of two evils argument is that, well, when it comes to like critical conversations like this, I don't think it has this effect, but in general with the media sphere, it kind of discourages critique a lot of the time. I think it was like really prevalent with the 2020 election, where it was, okay, we have Trump, we have Biden, Biden's the lesser of the two evils, this and that, right? And Biden drew a lot of his platform and his campaign on the fact that he would be this transitionary president, that come next election cycle, you're not going to have to vote for me. I'm not going to be here. It'll be someone else that I'll bring up. And we get to this year's election cycle, and he's, up until a few months ago, the one that we were supposed to be considering against Trump. And I feel like that whole conversation around urgency and the need to just pick the lesser of the two evils right then and there, so close to the election, just kind of muddled all of the critical conversation. And it's kind of in part what ended up not holding him accountable to that initial promise of being the transitionary president he said he'd be. So that's my main hesitancy with like that whole lesser of two evils argument, is that it kind of puts a pressure to not speak out, and a pressure to not identify like the legitimate drawbacks of a candidate, because it's like, well, there's only two and this one is just so bad, we can't even let it get there. So I think it does pose a threat towards more critical conversations.
I agree. I think also it's really interesting how you said, like Zoe just said, the fact that until a few months ago, until like a month or so, like really recently, Biden was still running for president. And then suddenly, since after his presidential debate with Trump, he dropped out, and then Harris took over, and then everyone's supporting Harris. And it almost makes me think, and this isn't really based off much fact, it's more of my own like contemplation. It's the fact that this urgency has actually played into the Democratic Party's favor. And if you guys remember, like the week after, the few days after the Biden-Trump debate, suddenly every Democrat, suddenly every Hollywood celebrity that had previously endorsed Biden was coming out with statements saying how they think Biden should drop out. And if you remember, until like a few nights ago, these were the same people completely in support of Biden. And I think it's interesting because this like overnight flip, because it can't be that before that debate, they weren't aware of Biden's mental capabilities or the way Biden was acting. It was very obvious to anyone watching. It was very obvious to members of his party and the administration. But however, by playing it with a presidential debate, they could now give a valid excuse to the public, and then they could frame the urgency of Harris and whatever candidate they would have chosen then to take over with more urgency, and therefore focus and push her in more into the spotlight and kind of take away any criticism. Additionally, the other conversation that we're having when it comes to a third party, again, because I just took US history, one thing that always comes to my mind when you say third party candidate is the 1912 election. That was between Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. And basically Roosevelt, who's a progressive, had split off from Taft's Republican Party. And the actual popular vote was really, really close. It was like 30, 20, 40 between Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. I think that was like probably the most successful third candidate that we've had. But regardless of the popular vote being really, really close, the electoral vote actually led to Wilson winning in a landslide. And I think that kind of just expresses the general issue with third parties currently, because it would have been incredible if America had strong third parties. And I think in the future, we should really focus on empowering third parties at a local level. So over the course of time, we can build them up at a state level, city level, municipal level, and then they can make a bigger change on the presidential elections.
And I guess the question also is, like, in a two-party system, like us as young people, like what can we do about that? And like how can we, I don't know, get our voices heard and what we want happen? Because I do think like on the other side, it somewhat does happen. Like I don't think most people thought that Roe v. Wade would get overturned. Like I wouldn't think that that could happen, but it did. And so many things, that's just one example of things on the sort of other side that have happened, and they actually take somehow these actions that they want like happen. And I feel on the sort of more left-leaning side, any sort of more radical or like pushing the needle idea over the past 4 years or even more, that has not happened. And I haven't personally seen it, definitely in the Biden administration, even before that. And so it's kind of like us as young people who might, and some of it we did see with like Bernie Sanders and Warren. Of course, they didn't get elected, but it's kind of like, how do we push some of those ideas and almost like get those more radical ideas to actually go through? Again, I don't have an answer, but it's almost like unfair how it does happen on one end, but not on the other end when it's supposed to be sort of a balance of power. So.
And I think talking about how to put pressure, it sucks because right now, like as voters, we do have the leverage considering Kamala does want to get elected. And so I was disappointed to see that during the debate, it seems like she catered to the more moderate voters instead of the like leftists who were maybe thinking about the uncommitted movement or voting, third party. And so it really just does feel like, I don't know, I don't think the Dem party is fully aware of like how much people are becoming disillusioned by them and like frustrated. And so I just feel like we needed more time to put pressure and like really emphasize the stakes and that how like frustrated. And I like realistically, like, someone was mentioning, I think it was Zoe's mentioning Biden saying that, this is just a transitional period, but now this transitional period is extending another like 4 years pretty much. So it's like, this isn't sustainable, the like voting for the lesser two evils. And it's leading to just like distrust in the government and distrust in our system. And I think, I don't know, like the system at this point needs to change. It's not just the candidates, because realistically, like I don't think our country is capable of electing someone who's truly radical. Like that just seems like an impossibility to me. So
All right. Did
Very
anybody-
rich
okay.
conversation. Very rich conversation, Dr. Bell and panelists. This is fantastic. Actually, I could sit here and listen to you guys for the rest of the afternoon, to be honest with you. We have a few questions in the panel, in the Q&A, Dr. Bell. Would you like to take those, or would you like us to go through those?
It's up to you. I'm fine doing it, or if you all want to jump in, that's fine. I have no problem. Just looking at the three questions here, I was just going to ask a combined, because a lot in the chat were asking about this contradiction between the lesser of evils and challenging the Dems and moving to a progressive advance. Similarly, there's been concerns and questions over the various issues facing this country and the world, including climate change, inflation, reproductive rights, some of which you've all already mentioned. And to that point, I mean, Kamala and Donald Trump both said they were going to continue fracking. Both are going to continue sending weapons to Israel, and so on. So I guess the question would be, can you all talk about this overall urgency of these various issues, and then this apparent contradiction between wanting an advance left of the two parties, but feeling hampered by that? And then it even says here, for those of you voting for Kamala, how is your voting for Harris as opposed to Trump in alignment with your views, given that the Democratic Party has also been pro-police, pro-capitalism, and voted against holding corporations accountable for their human rights violations? Good questions. Good questions. Anybody want to jump in there?
Yeah, at point blank period, I won't be voting for Harris. And that's just because based like what the questioner asked of how can you reconcile everything you've been saying about holding people to accountability? How can you do that while voting for someone who has explicitly said that they don't align with your values? And I personally believe that there is no reconciliation, which is why I'm just not going to be moving forward with that. I'm not going to buy into the lesser of two evils argument. And I do really believe that now is the time to push that, and now is the time to like switch the tide. And I think because I think it's there's just no way to keep your morality intact and continue to vote for the same future as our past. I just think it's purely unlogical. And I know that change, does come in waves, and sometimes we need to, go with the status quo to make certain changes. But I think now that we've reached an extreme where it just can't be enabled anymore. And that's my personal opinion. And I know that a lot of people have also reached that point. Um, and I saw someone in the chat bring up like rank choice voting, which is something that I know is starting to be implemented more and more across the country. I think it's like 15 or like 18 cities across America that have now been like implementing this new system of voting, which I think is really interesting, and I think that we should continue to implement those practices because they do help us with these frustrating situations where we see someone has done really well in the popular vote, but then like we don't see them being elected for obviously the way the system works in America. So personally, I won't be trying to reconcile that because I don't think that there is, and I think that us now as a generation, we really, really, really need to come out of this framework of fear and just try to push the mark, push the status quo as much as we can, because we're the ones who are going to lose it in the end. So yeah, that's just like my blunt answer to I think it's a really important question, and it's really hard when you have conversations with people who have really good intentions, but they feel like they're trapped in this dilemma, and this is the only way we can move forward. But I just personally don't agree with that course of action.
And I agree with everything you're saying. And I think it's very admirable to, remove yourself from the trap. If we're talking about specific policies, I think like Kamala protecting gender affirming care, protecting reproductive rights, and hopefully making some sort of legislation on assault rifles. Those are the things kind of I'm clutching onto because I know none of those are going to occur under Trump, and we'll see actually the reverse with that. But you're right, like it is like a bit hypocritical to sit here and talk about all of these issues and then vote for someone who doesn't fully align with them. But I do feel, which is part of the campaign tactic about fear. I do feel it's like a preventative measure. And while she's in office working with grassroots to kind of go from the bottom up. But yeah, like currently you're right. Like we're not putting pressure. And nothing's really going to change immediately, hopefully.
Right. I definitely agree. And I think Ashton said this earlier. We do need to keep putting pressure on the Democratic Party with all of these grassroots movements. I am voting for Kamala, which does feel like a contradiction because, again, I think I'm going to echo what Sadie said about voting for Kamala, maybe not like aligning with all of my values with her policy. But again, at the end of the day, she does support reproductive rights. She is trying to fight abortion bans. She has sensible gun control policies, and with Project 2025, which is definitely going to happen under Trump, and just like tying it back to the environmental lens, Project 2025 has a lot of really insane policies about environmental protection going forward. I do understand and acknowledge that both Kamala and Trump are pro-fracking. But just like to go over some of Project 2025's policies, they're going to reverse the Antiquities Act. So a lot of our historical monuments and landmarks are going to be publicly available for drilling. We're going to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord again. The Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, is going to be completely bulldozed. So a lot of the perpetrators of climate change, which I believe are the large companies, are no longer going to have a lot of clean air and water restrictions. And I feel like this pollution is going to, there's obviously disproportionate effects in neighborhoods who cannot adjust to these infrastructure damages. And I feel like that's all going to be ushered in under Project 2025, which will be enabled by Trump's election. So I definitely do have mixed feelings about voting for Kamala because, again, her democracy is not the democracy of the people, or it can't really be considered that way. But I feel like as long as we manage to put pressure on Kamala during her term, I do think that can pave the way for change.
I wanted to jump off a point I think Sadie said earlier. I think you said something to the effect of like America wouldn't elect a candidate so radical. Was it something to that effect? Okay. So I'm assuming you meant left-leaning radical, right? Okay, yeah. 'Cause I was like, there's like half a country here that's full on ready to go for Trump, who I think is extremely radical in his ideas. So I'm kind of teetering right now. I'm very much inclined to vote third party this year. But I don't know, Kamala kind of feels more like, I don't want to use the word afterthought at this point, but my last concern before I really make the decision to go third party is kind of seeing the remnants of the debate and what that's meant for the Republican Party. And kind of seeing what the Republican Party and the conservatives are generally saying about Trump following this debate. Because if the support still seems to be as unwavering as it is, I think that might have a slight factor in my decision to fully go third party or not. But I feel like it's also like the whole idea of reconciling it is interesting because a lot of this stuff is so contradictory and like a lot of it is like a paradox and a lot of it is just kind of figuring out where you fit within the contradiction or where you fit within the intersection of different things. Like I don't think I can hold any malice to somebody who does vote for Kamala because there is validity in the idea that one candidate can be more I'm going to use the word malleable than the other. I think it's fair to say, okay, well, the things that I have in mind as concerns, there's no way in hell that Trump is going to deliver on them. Maybe Kamala can do more. So I understand the validity of going off of a maybe. But yeah, for me, I think it's going to come down to what the Republican Party is saying about Trump before I fully decide to go third party. But I feel like I'm at 99% sure right now. But that's my feeling.
And to Josie's question in the chat about putting pressure on Democratic presidents in the past, I believe that the main reason Biden dropped out was because he recognized that there was like intra-party disputes over his candidacy and kind of like painting Trump as the villain and taking him down, them recognizing that maybe Biden wasn't the best candidate, that people were just disillusioned with his performance. And I feel like that was kind of actually as a result of our party criticizing him and putting pressure on him. So that's just my take.
I guess, Zoe, your kind of correction made me realize like we did elect someone who was very, very, very radical, and like that is kind of shocking. But we see kind of this like reworking of the Republican Party to kind of abandon any like differences and just put everything behind this like one person, and kind of we see, well, that's not entirely true. Like there are internal disputes and there's definitely a lot of Republicans who are like not as radical and who are like concerned where the direction of the party is going. But we kind of see them, a lot of people abandoning that and just putting everything behind Trump. And like, I don't know. So maybe it is a possibility. I feel like there's just like still so many moderates who are like more democratic leaning, but just who aren't going to be comfortable being like a leftist. So
Yeah, are there any concerns that voting for a third party might hand the presidency to Trump?
I think
in
that's
the-
okay. Oh, sorry.
Go for it, Ashton.
I think that's okay. I think we live in a world where there are consequences, and I think for standing so strong on genocide, the Democratic Party might have to face that consequence. We as a people might have to face that consequence for the Democratic Party being so strong behind this, which is why I really appreciate Allah's point of this is a contradiction of morals, and I'm going to contradict my morals and vote for this party because I don't want the outcome to be Trump. So I think, yeah, I think that's a very real fear, but I don't think it's unwarranted. I think if it's going to happen, it's a direct consequence of this stance that we're taking.
It's also like because of the way we have a two-party system and then also electoral college, the fact that all of us are from, you know, New York, New Jersey, whether we vote a third party or not, like if you just think about it numbers wise, it probably will still be blue. So I mean, how I've been thinking about it is perhaps if you do vote a third party and there's enough of that, that is one way to send a signal to the Democratic Party that like there are people who believe in like more radical ideas and want to champion them. I don't know, that's how something I've been toying with, but also the idea that I guess if you live in a swing state, the fact that you vote one way or another matters in a different way. And I think to me that concept is fairly interesting where like the point of having electoral college, whatever, when it formed was to allow like minority voices to be heard. And now that I think that what that means has changed because of technology, where people are able to, minority voices or people who live in, I guess, Idaho or like smaller states that are more dispersed, are able to engage politically and online. So what does it mean to like support minority voices, where I feel like on the radical right, those voices are kind of supported and driving the decision making and the full political party. And like Zoe, I know you wrote in the chat, like Trump has been great at supporting those radical ideas and moderate Republicans. But on the left, we're not great at that in any way, where more radical ideas like aren't supported. And I guess to further that, like in the Trump campaign, they're becoming even more radical in a way. Like we didn't really talk about this, but like JD Vance is the running mate and he's fully funded by a lot of like tech billionaires who have really concerning thoughts about like how the government should work and a lot of money to make those thoughts happen. And that would be brought like into our forefront in terms of like a full authoritarian regimes. Even some like Peter Thiel, who's like a major funder, like he doesn't fully believe in like women's rights or even women's suffrage, like the right to vote. So it's just kind of like the radical ideas are compounding on themselves and brought to the front of politics and able to be enacted on. And on our side, or like our side, and that even idea of saying like our side, their side is already a problem, but like on a more left-leaning side, you just don't see it as much. So like what are ways to signal that? And yeah, I think I went on a little bit of a ramble, but yeah.
I guess. Oh, sorry.
You sure?
Yeah, you can go.
Okay, my point was really quick. Ashton, I wanted to say I loved your point about consequences for our actions and stuff, because it really reminded me of what Linda McDonald Carter was saying the other day on All Politics Are Local, that you have leaders and you have elected officials, and leaders are the ones who are willing to die for their people and stuff. Because it kind of just made me think of like really like the gravity of this entire conversation we're having, that, you know, do you like kind of thinking like, do you or do I believe so firmly in these ideas that we're preaching about right now that we're actually willing to hold both leaders accountable and say that, no, we're going to stand and we're going to die on the hill that we're on when it comes to these issues, even if it means, you know, like, even if it means that the two-party system is going to maybe not take over is the right word, or supersede that in a way. You know, are we still going to maybe not reconcile with it and maybe say, no, this is what I think. And if neither of the two parties in the two-party system are going to handle it the way I want them to handle it, then I'm not doing that. So
Yeah, so
I love that you
feel like
brought.
our politics are going to shift to the right as time progresses if we don't recognize that. Really quickly, the United States, we're ignoring the International Court of Justice's ruling that Israel needs to stop conducting the war in a genocidal manner. And internationally, we are very far to the right on this. So yeah, I just want to throw that out there that we are not even radical in the things that we're asking for.
Yeah, touch on that, and then I was going to broach another thing. Even like 80% of Dems want a ceasefire. It's like 60% of Republicans, or maybe it's lower number. And I just feel like what the people want is just not reflected in our elected officials. But kind of broaching another subject about Zoe, you were mentioning, or I don't know if it was Zoe actually, about like people in Idaho and kind of dispersed and the electoral college. And I think, and what you said about Trump being able to mobilize radicals and moderates, I think there's like been a lot of studies on kind of the changing demographics within the Democratic Party and how it's kind of becoming more elitist. And we used to rely a lot on labor, and kind of that was one of our platforms. But we see kind of this like righteousness developing, especially in comparison to like Trump and Project 2025 of like, we are moral, we are just, and like everyone else is stupid. And like this ridicule and this like everyone else is stupid. And it's kind of like alienating. And we see a lot, in the past, a lot more of the 1% was tend to side with Republicans for economic policies. But now, we see wealthy people also voting blue, and there being less focus on the working class and blue collar. And I think Biden, tried to emphasize that he kind of came from that background, but I don't know how much of a good job Kamala is doing with that. And also, I feel like already because she's, a woman of color, that makes her hard to relate to for a lot of people. So I don't know. I think that's really interesting, and kind of how, I guess, the Democratic Party has kind of become out of touch with their labor roots, and just kind of opening that up. But
Thank you so much. This is such a rich conversation, and there's so many questions that we won't be able to get to today. But I'd like to throw it back to Dr. Ball to sort of do any wrap-up questions that he might have before he hands it off to Josie.
No, I agree. We've covered a lot and don't have enough time to get into too many other things. I just want to thank everybody for this great discussion and a really enjoyable experience. And if there's time, I would invite folks for any closing thoughts about where we're headed and what they'd like to see happen. There's been questions about how to define activism, how to define steps forward. Maybe you can fold some of that into your closing comments, but other than that, to all of you, to those in the chat, to Josie and everyone who put this together and sent me this wonderful invitation, peace, as long as you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over to any of you.
well, I just want to say, thank you so much for this opportunity. And, I was a little skeptical coming on, because I figured it was kind of just going to be an echo chamber of all of us agreeing with each other. But I do feel like I learned a lot, especially from the people who are thinking of voting third party. And I do feel like I've kind of been avoiding listening to those voices because I knew I'd be swayed. And so now I feel like I have a lot of reflecting and thinking to do. But I don't know, I think it's amazing. And it does give me hope to see all of these really capable young activists. And yeah, I know it's typical to try to like end on a good note. And I don't know, it does feel a little bleak right now, but I don't know. I think hopefully we can mobilize.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I learned something new coming into this. Definitely acknowledging the inherent contradiction of the lesser of two evils argument, which I came into believing, but now I am like genuinely contemplating a third party vote and what that would mean and what kind of pressure that would give. But I don't know, like just like seeing all of this like protest work on campus and how it's being censored, I feel like it like drives this certain like I guess passion in me to maybe actually participate in that and maybe engage with stuff and make a statement without it being online, maybe something I can do in person. So definitely just engaging with those movements. Because if not that, then what else can I do that will actually have a tangible impact? And I feel like a lot of people are afraid to, I guess, practice what they preach and be willing to dismantle the administration, maybe because it puts them at risk. But yeah, I definitely learned a lot, and I hope people will continue fighting as well. So
Yeah, I agree. First of all, I would like to thank Public Square and Dr. Ball for hosting this event. It was awesome. It was a great opportunity for all of us to discuss very important topics. And I think the note that I really want to end on is the fact I think if we can take one thing away from this panel for the rest of our lives, it's probably to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes. I think before this panel, some of us were pro-Harris and we could not imagine voting for another candidate, and others came in and not understanding how you could vote for Harris considering her policies. But I think throughout the panel, we really got to learn the other perspective and discuss perspectives of others that are not on this panel. So I think in the future, it's very important for us to learn to be empathetic and to really put ourselves in different life circumstances when considering such complex topics. So thank you so much to everyone.
Again, thank you, everyone. I think I learned a lot too, speaking with everyone, but this entire weekend. What I'll say is, I think I look at this. I think earlier someone mentioned the concept of being trapped, and I came in, and I still think I'm part of the trapped mindset of I have to pick either Trump or Harris. There's no other option, and I know the options that I'm going to pick. But if we're all trapped, then nothing changes, and everything is just the same. So, and what is that large event that's going to untrap us? I thought the large event would be COVID, global pandemic. People are maybe thinking about what really matters in life and the value of human life and how our government has treated us. And that wasn't it. So it doesn't seem like some giant event is going to come down and change everything. And I think it's going to be up to people to put pressure on the Dems with third party votes. One thing that I understood coming in happens, and I'm like, well, this is what happens when you ignore what people value. So overall, thank you everyone for the discussion, and I can't wait to tune into more discussions.
I also want to say thank you to everybody involved in putting this together, in coming out and speaking, and everybody who's in the audience. Jared Ball mentioned one prominent alumnus of Brandeis, which is Angela Davis. Another one that I'm very interested in by his work is Abby Hoffman. And my general point with that is that there are so many really inspiring and amazing activists that come from the older generations whose work has kind of given us shoulders to be screaming on top of about our own opinions, especially when it comes to Gen X, especially when it comes to some of the baby boomers. There's a lot more that I think can be done when it comes to intergenerational collaboration, because a lot of us view a lot of these issues the same way. But I think the problem with Gen Z is that we're so inundated by content and information, we don't know how to sift it all the time. So I think having conversations like these where Gen Z is able to kind of bounce off of one another from different members within the generation, but also having conversations, and even myself having work experience with Public Square Amplified, with getting to work with people across generations, it does a lot to quell the divide that often gets pushed between us. And I think we just need more of it, honestly. And I think that's how we come towards building a society that's more critical, has more critical thinking skills, has media literacy skills, and is ready to take on not just this election, but the results of this election and all the future elections with a lot more demands and confidence.
Josie, it's on you.
Oh, did I think Ala,
Yeah.
and I think maybe it's just Ala who's left. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I
That's
was
okay.
having trouble with my mic. I want to thank all of you guys for your discussion, and it was really such an honor to speak with you guys and think with you guys. And I think that's a huge point I want to come out with. I think a lot of the times, as Gen Z, we get a lot of flack from the older generation of not being able to think critically and moving with the crowd and just watching TikToks and doing all the things. But I think it was good to come out of that today and really discuss and think critically about our future. But then on the other hand, I read a piece, I want to say a couple months ago, I can't remember, by Mohammed al-Qard, who is a Palestinian journalist, and he's been doing a lot of really important work out of Palestine, because he himself is from there, and he was kicked out of his home along with the rest of his family. And he wrote a piece about what it was like to attend a protest outside of it was an award ceremony for journalists that the New York Times was hosting, I believe, all of which who were obviously um, not really pro-Palestine, I guess. All of their writing, all of their coverage is very neutral and most times leaning towards Israel, with a lot of the genocide being framed as like some, I don't know, some entity that we don't know about is if inflicting this harm on millions of people. And the inspiration for his piece was an article that James Baldwin had written back in the 60s about how Black people were also accused of being anti-Semitic a lot of the times during his day of age. And I thought it was so powerful and a little sad that this Palestinian writer is now plagued again with a lot of the same accusations and a lot of the same burdens as James Baldwin, who was like a Black writer in the 1900s. He's now plagued with a lot of the same things, and it shows how much our suffering has not changed. And while there is a good collectivism in that now we, as Black people, as Arabs, as people of color, we have this thing that's uniting us. It's also a little sad to know that across all ages, a lot of things haven't changed. And so, like I said earlier in the call, I will not be falling victim to this quote unquote trap, and I will not be voting for Harris, and I'll be, you know, consistent on this path that we're all on for morality and humanity, because I do think that there is a push for us to complicate humanity, and it's not complicated. There's a lot of political jibber jabber, there's a lot of analysis, there's a lot of terms being thrown around, but at the end of the day, it's not complicated. You know what's right, you know what's moral, you know what's human. And I think we just all need to follow that a little bit more nowadays, and hopefully we'll see the change that we want to. So it was an honor to be a part of this panel, and yeah.
Thank you all so much. I think there's someone with a hand up, and then Brett. But thank you all for coming along on this ride with us. Linda, are you Amanda? I don't know how to give Linda.
Yeah, I can let her talk if you'd like me to.
Yeah,
I'm gonna click allow to talk.
And yeah, okay. And Linda Carter is one of the co-founders of Public Square Amplified, and often steps in place for me. And Linda, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes.
I just want to say, Zoe, not just you, but all of you remind me of not the same thing, but what we were going through during the 1960s. And to see the young people coming back is like an honor. The other thing is that one of the terms that people use and became a bad term is activist. You know, now people are, oh, that's the activist. I know because I get called that. But I just want to tell you guys, you are exactly what the public, each and every one of us living and residing in this country, are charged with doing. And our Constitution, while not perfect, it gives us the ability to do this. And you guys are carrying out. So whatever side you're on And I'm 70 years old and I'm struggling about this election. And I have young people coming to me asking me, what should I do? I can't tell them what to do, obviously, but I can, your analysis, which was spot on all the time, no matter how you came down, I so admire. And, you know, I'm hoping I can share this with my students. I teach political science and civics at Essex County College and have done for a very long time. Sometimes I do it on the corner of Broad and Market Street. That's just what I do. But you are exactly what we need going forth. And I hope you have no regrets when you get older about what you said here, because hopefully it will only evolve. So thank you so much. Man, you guys enough.
Thanks,
All
Carter.
right, I gotta go. I'm getting emotional. See you.
And I'd like to bring Britt Harley on to close us out. Harley.
Thanks, Josie. And first, I would like to acknowledge all of the young people, our moderator, everyone here on the call. Thank you, thank you, thank you for saying yes, for being a part of what this is. And just to close us out, and thinking about the two-party system and where all of you young people are landing, people assume they can only get what already exists. So when we think about where we land, people think that it's really either or. And it's because we aren't always challenged to be radical in our imagination of what could be. And so I want you all to be moving from this space and all that you've got from this conversations over the weekend, to be thinking about what can this world look like for folks who are usually not included in the conversation, for folks who are oppressed, for people who cannot pay their rents, for people who are being pushed away, for people who are not eating, right? These are just basic human rights. And we're called radical for asking for affordable housing and things that people can just have and live and have wages that cover everything. What is radical about that? It's just basic human rights are what we're asking for. And when I look at the material conditions of my community here in Newark, New Jersey, it's clear that development is happening, entertainment is being built, but it's not for the people who have been here and who remain here to be a part of. So when we think about gentrification and urban renewal, there's a new building going up every day that's a residential or luxury housing that doesn't include folks here in Georgia King Village that's still living in squalor, or have landlords that are not fixing ceilings. We literally had a building be flooded out after one of the last downpours that we have. And it's like, where do those people go? And why do they have to live in those conditions? And so what are we asking for is basic human rights. But I challenge us all to be thinking about, what can this world look like when we are in community, when we do get with community members, when we do get with those organizers to build power amongst each other, to demand more, and to continue to build a world that we see possible, that because people have us in this either or, we can't see past choosing this or choosing that, and going beyond and asking questions around what could be and also what should be, right? And so I challenge us all to leave this call and to go outside and to look for organizations and people who are building, who are dreaming, and who are believing for something different and something that's equitable for all people. And so that's all that I have to share. I just want to thank Public Square Amplified for bringing these young people together to have a very important conversation. We were happy to be able to sponsor this event. I'm the co-founder of the Newark News and Story Collaborative, and we believe in preserving the stories of Newark residents. And more now than ever, it is important to be preserving and lifting up narratives of folks we usually don't hear from, especially during these times, and all the time when we're in spaces and having these types of conversations. So thank you all so much. Thank you all who have joined. Thank you, Josie. Thank you, Pinda from NJ Urban News. And thank you to all, to everyone. Thank you so much. That's all that I have. And I'm gonna pass it back to you, Josie.
Oh no, we're out. We're 501. We out of here as and in the words of Jared Ball, peace as long as you're willing to fight for it. So thanks. See you guys soon.